The Year of the Urbanscape was an idea that was born actually out of one word, and Paul Florin, who's sitting here, who's a professor of psychology, and has got some of his students here, who's been teaching a marvelous urban health course this year, or this semester. Paul Florin and I were sitting at lunch, and we were talking about the fact that we're sitting here in downtown Providence, and we don't really have the kinds of connections to the community that we would like. So for the past 4 years, we've actually been working towards that. We've been supporting research. We have a small amount of state-sponsored funding on one of the state grants, and we have supported research and teaching and outreach projects for the last 4 years. Very marvelous kinds of things. But we really wanted to have that visible presence and really interact with the community in ways that we hadn't done it before. And out of that, the idea of Urbanscape was formed. Paul said the word Urbanscape, and it all tumbled out from there. But it wasn't just Paul and me working on this. It's been a real team effort. Tammy Vargas Warner, who's here, has worked on it very hard. She's actually our urban initiative coordinator. I see Joanne DeBello has come in back in the back. She's a media person. Marshall Feldman's up here. He's actually a professor in urban studies. Paul, I've mentioned. Anybody, am I missing anybody? I'll get to Mark in a moment. And the other wonderful thing that Paul Florin did was to introduce us to Mark Levitt, who has been just amazing in his ability to bring together diverse and unique and important individuals to talk about the urban situation, the urban setting, the urban future. And so tonight, you'll be treated to another event. These aren't just forums, these are events, experiences. And Mark is the one who has brought together the individuals, coordinate the programs, and he will be the moderator tonight. He's actually a storyteller, radio show host on a nationally syndicated public radio station program called Action Speaks. He has a wonderful production called Triple Decker. We presented that earlier this year. So he does a variety of things, and he does them all in great style and in a way that really educates. So without further ado, Mark Levitt.
And of course, Kat Quinna, thank you, without whom this wouldn't happen. Thank you, Kat. Well, this program, if it's done nothing else, has brought me into a suit and a tie. And it is me, yes, temporarily. I thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it, and it's been an honor to be involved with Urbanscape and the University of Rhode Island's campus up here for really not only a year, but probably at this point about a year and a half. So I really appreciate this opportunity and the trust that they gave to me to help organize, and I do say help not only with humility, but with honesty. And I thank them for putting their trust in my work. I'd like you all, if you could, just briefly to close your eyes. And I want you to imagine walking from City Hall to Olga's. How many people find it difficult to imagine taking that walk? How many think that there's something in between somehow that's blocking you? How many feel that there might be like a separation between the areas that we have called the jewelry district and the downtown? Raise your hands. Now you can open your eyes to see how many do. It's that conversation that we're going to have right now. With the raising of 195, we've been presented, all of us, with a gift of economics, a gift of cultural intertwining, and a gift of a long walk, uninterrupted by a highway in between. How many of you also, as you did that, still think that Leo's is there? How many of you remember the lady or man that you asked to dance at the Met? Okay. So we all have memories there, including the memory of the highway. And in some way, this conversation is a conversation about creating a new vision for Providence, a vision uninterrupted by President Eisenhower's Highway Act of 1954. And to help me create and talk about the vision that's beginning to percolate within the sidewalks and minds of this city are a wonderful group of panelists. And I'd like to introduce them now. Maybe raise your hand when I introduce you, just in case people don't know. Bert Crenca, the artistic director and co-founder of AS220, a nonprofit center for the arts in Providence, Rhode Island. AS220 was established in 1985 to provide local, unjuried, and uncensored home for the arts and for artists. The organization maintains 3 buildings providing 58 artists live and or workspaces, 4 exhibition spaces, a print shop, 2 darkrooms, a technology lab, a stage, a recording studio, a black box theater, a dance studio, a popular bar, and a partridge and a pear tree. Bonnie Nickerson, she's the Director of Long-Term Planning for the City of Providence. In her role, Bonnie oversees the city's current and long-range planning projects and initiates initiatives including comprehensive and neighborhood planning efforts, as well as redevelopment and special area plans. Her staff leads the city initiative in urban design, GIS, waterfront planning, environmental planning, and transportation and transit planning. Mike McCormick. Mike is a licensed architect responsible for planning and execution of the recent capital plan of approximately $1 billion undertaken by Brown University over the last 8 years, adding 1 million square feet and renovating another 2 million square feet. He is a frequent speaker to the Society of College and University Planners and Association of University Architects. He holds degrees from Ball State University and MIT and has 25 years of experience in planning, architectural design, and project management. Colin Kane. Colin is the chair of the 195 Redevelopment Commission, is a founding partner of Peregrine Group. Peregrine is a real estate development and third-party advisory firm with offices in East Providence, Rhode Island, and Boston, Massachusetts, founded in 2001. Colin is Peregrine's lead partner for project transactional activities, project planning, asset acquisition, leasing, financial analysis, permitting, due diligence, and debt equity capitalization. Marshall Feldman is a director of research and academic affairs at the Center for Urban Studies and Research at the University of Rhode Island. He is also coordinator of the university's Urban Studies program. He came to URI in 1987 as a faculty member in the graduate program in community planning and area development. Before coming to URI, he was on the faculty at Cleveland State University, and prior to that, as a visiting professor and lecturer at the University of California at Berkeley and University of California at Santa Cruz, the University of Texas at Austin, and San Francisco State University. And last but not least, Michael Van Leesten. Michael has over 40 years of community and business development experience, including executive director of the Providence Planning and Development Department, director of Fleet National Bank, chair of Rhode Island Home Mortgage and Finance Corporation, executive director of the OIC of Rhode Island, public affairs management with the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation, and currently is chair of, he has directed, managed, and developed various types of commercial and residential real estate projects in Rhode Island and in Connecticut. I thank you all very much for being here today. And I'd also just quickly like to introduce the new director, just coronated director of the 195 Commission, Jen Brody. Could you just raise your hand? So here's how we'll do it. But the first thing, I gotta give you my ground rules. Here's the deal. You can't leave here saying that I wish Mark would have asked this question. You can't leave saying, oh, I didn't agree with what this person said, because at this point, by very fact of you coming in here, you are now a co-creator of this experience that we're going to have. Now, I want to make sure that you understand that. How many agree to doing that? How many agree with those? Oh, this is wonderful. Because I have to tell you, I don't know all the questions to ask. They need to be pushed in directions that they don't know where they're going. And you need to feel satisfied as you leave here and not say to your friends, I'm never going to see Mark Levitt again. So I depend on you for creating this to the best extent as we can. Before we get started in the actual question and answer, I wanted to give us a kind of a framework for looking at this issue. And there's two ways in which we're going to do that. Bonnie is going to just show a couple slides and give a short presentation of where the area is in its history. And then I'm going to ask the director of the Providence Foundation, Dan Bowden, to come up and talk briefly about their organization's history of thinking about this area under I-95, 195. Deal? Okay. Bonnie, please.
Thanks so much. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes just kind of orienting us to this area and talking a little bit about the history. There's some interesting facts that I think are worth telling, and many of us know the story of what is really the jewelry district, but I thought I would just go over a few things. From the early 1800s to the early 1900s, the area really transitioned from mostly a residential neighborhood into the center of the city's jewelry industry. And you can see in that photo that what we're talking about are small-scale operations, work that was done by hand with very few employees. These were very small operations. And because of that, the district was built out as a number of very small firms in very small buildings, and a lot of those buildings are out there today, and you see the remnants of this. Just some interesting facts. In 1830, there were 27 firms in the jewelry district doing this work, and by 1890 there were 200 firms. And so at that time, that made up of about a quarter of the nation's jewelry production was happening here in Rhode Island, and of the work that was happening in Rhode Island, 99.9% of it was happening right here in this district. So I think that's something interesting to keep in mind. And when you look at these pictures, you can see the incredible density of the development that was here. So we're talking about an extremely dense urban development with residential structures very close to these sort of emerging jewelry firms. And a lot of the residential structures were just starting to be converted over to this use for production and small-scale manufacturing. And then we had sort of a turnover in the 1890s where small manufacturing firms were developed, so a little bit larger size, maybe 2, 3, 4-story brick buildings. So that's kind of what you see as the pattern of development out in the jewelry district. In the late 1800s, the streetcar was developed in Providence, and that sort of changed the dynamic of where people could live in relation to where they worked. So that's when neighborhoods to the west and to the south of downtown really started to explode, and so the residential components of the jewelry district sort of leaked out into the west and south of the area. And as we all know, after World War II, urban renewal was really what sort of took the rest of the residential components out of the area. So not just the highway itself, where the highway was built, but other areas were taken over for parking to support the highway. So you had really the decimation of the rest of the residential neighborhood, and all of the parking was there to support the highway use. So I think that's just interesting to keep in mind. And here you can see what that really looked like. This was, I believe, 1959, 1960, when the highway was actually going in, and you can see on the left what it meant to actually put a highway through a dense urban area, and it dramatically changed the city. And it's just really amazing to look back at those old slides before the highway was built. Again, this shows you the red line on the left is where the 195 highway was built, and it shows you the dense urban fabric that was there. And then the slide on the right is an image that we're all familiar with. The 95 and 195 being built and showing what that really looks like. So I think this slide is so great. It's the mid-1800s, and I think it's really worth noting that the waterfront area of the 195 land of the Jewelry District was the city's working waterfront. This was before Fields Point was filled in, so there was no port. This was the center of commerce, the center of maritime trade. Ship Street, obviously, that reminds us that this is really where the center of commerce was happening. If you think of, on the east side, there are small streets, Doubloon Street, Cent Street, Silver Street, Dollar Street. That's because this is where the heart of commerce was happening. The Custom House is where that is, because that's where goods were coming into the city. So I think for us to keep in mind what this looked like, and if we have a chance to look at some other slides later, if you see this image of the finger piers, you'll recall that when we're designing the public space, which is right where those finger piers are today, the public space will be right where these are. The remnants of the finger piers are actually in the ground on the site, and we're trying to honor that and show that some way in the development of the public space. So it's just so interesting. It's sort of like an urban archaeology study of going through and finding the layers and layers of history that have been built up on the site, and we're trying to expose some of those and draw interest to really the history of what was the heart of the city at the time. Thanks.
We can shut those lights now and get the screen up. And Dan Bowden, come on up. And maybe we can get some stage. Can we get some stage lights over there too? You think? Oh, thanks. Yep. Great. And you guys can get back. And now, Dan Bowden, who's the director of the Providence Foundation, that's been so involved with the not only the 195 district, but also Kennedy Park and Kennedy Plaza. Dan, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome. It's really exciting to see everybody here. We've had a number of these forums over the years, and the more people get involved in this, the better. Thank you, panelists, for spending the time here. Mark asked me to maybe just explain a little bit of the background, and I like Mark's term gift, because this is a gift, but this is a gift that's taken a long time, and we have to get this right. It goes back to like 1988, 89, when the state realized that the highway that was built in the 50s was falling down, and they were going to have to do something to replace it. Well, the foundation and the city got together, and with the inspiration of architects like the late, great Bill Warner, said, why don't you look at relocating the highway? Because the highway as built never really worked. It never met the interstate highway standards. It was actually designed before the Eisenhower program, and it was the first leg of the interstate system in the state. And so it never worked. Rebuilding it in place was considered to be the do-nothing alternative. Not the greatest, but we all convinced them to look at relocation. But one of the key elements here is that there was no do-nothing alternative. Many times when you come to public investment, if you don't do anything, the world doesn't fall down. If you did nothing here, the highway would fall down, and 250,000 cars a day would start calling the governor, what's going on? So there was no do nothing, which was very fortunate. You had to do this major project. Then another element that came into play, the city and the foundation said, well, if you look at the relocation, let's look at how that land might be redeveloped. Let's integrate that into the environmental review process that the state and the feds have to do when they look at major infrastructure projects. And that was accepted. And the city and the foundation developed something called the Old Harbor Plan. That was the first look at how to redevelop these 40 acres. It was integrated into the EIS, which then meant that as part of the decision-making process, the benefits of that development were then evaluated when the feds went to make a decision, which was terrific because this is not an inexpensive alternative, but all the benefits were measured. So that took 6 years to go through that. Tremendous support. The whole community came out. All the organizations came out to public hearings, wrote letters of support. It made so much sense because the best answer for highways was also the best answer for community development. Oftentimes they're in conflict. This one, they were aligned. So it was a tremendous support. Now, the next fortunate thing that came along after they approved the relocation was that we happened to have a senator from Rhode Island sitting as chair of the Public Works Committee in Washington when they were authorizing a new Highway Transportation Act, Senator John Chafee. He liked this project. He was in a position to get the state money. He got the state money. He didn't say, this is an earmark, but he did say, I'm going to get you enough money where you can do this project. And that's what got the project going. So there was a couple of key elements, some luck that entered into the picture, some good timing that presents this gift to us. And the last thing I'll just mention is the actual construction started in 1998, so it's been a while already. But the last couple of years, the foundation has really advocated very strongly for the creation of the commission. We understood, and I think everyone knows, that someone needed to be in charge of these 40 acres. RIDOT could never handle the redevelopment of this land, so we advocated for the creation of the commission, and we're glad that Colin Kane, Mike Van Leesten, and all the others, volunteers, Barbara's out in the audience, really spent a lot of, almost 2 years now, really shaping this up. So we have a great opportunity now, and we can hear from the panels, but this is a gift. It's taken a long time, and we will get it right. This will be an extraordinary development with the help of everybody in the whole community. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up for everybody else. And remember, you have responsibility here, everybody. Nice to see you all out here. So, what's a knowledge district, Colin?
It's the made-up name. They replaced the name for the jewelry district. It's a brand that has been applied. I'm not sure what the genesis was. I think, from the commission's perspective, it doesn't just entail the 195 lands, the 20-odd acres that we're responsible for. It doesn't just entail the jewelry district, but it really extends to the hospital district, the jewelry district, the 195 area, the arts district, where Bird and PPAC are. I believe it extends to downtown because we need to connect. And most importantly, Mark, we'll be building a pedestrian linkage to the east side where Rhode Island School of Design and Brown University are. So I think it extends all the way there. So it's kind of it's not the sexiest marketing device I've ever heard, but it's a big area.
Does it drive your thinking about the district?
Our thinking. It's a commission.
Your thinking personally, but as well as everybody's. You're right. Yeah.
I think that no one has quite defined it. I don't think there's anyone that has said to the commission, "This is the state's priorities. This is the City of Providence priorities," as it relates to the knowledge district. I think there's been a lot of discussion led by the Chamber of Commerce, the Providence Foundation, by the City of Providence itself, to try to understand where we position and how we take advantage of this, as you described, once-in-a-generation opportunity to reconnect these disparate areas. There are knowledge activities there today, extraordinary knowledge activities with the hospitals, Care New England, Lifespan, Brown University, Rhode Island School of Design, Johnson & Wales, URI. It works today as a knowledge district, but there's a whole lot of other uses that are office uses and light manufacturing uses that I think, at least in my opinion, qualify for economic dynamism and activity down there. There are people that live there. Mm-hmm. People that live there are part of the knowledge district.
Michael, you've been involved with Providence, Rhode Island, probably longer than anybody in the world.
We're friends.
So, how does this activity, by sitting on the commission and helping to vision the future of that district, how does it fit into the sum total of the work that you've been doing in economic development and in social action from your life?
Well, I'd like to first respond to the knowledge economy, and even the folks that coined the phrase are still struggling to define it to the community. And the communities where we're trying to do community development, the underserved populations, it means nothing. It means, because folks are looking for jobs and opportunities, folks from a jobs vantage point where they can qualify, participate as well as business opportunities. So the knowledge economy to them implies smart people with white robes in laboratories doing wonderful things. And we know people in laboratory with white robes do wonderful things. But we have a diverse community now, which demographics we all are quite aware of. That's no longer the same demographic back some 43 years ago. When you were 17?
Yeah, that's when I met you. You were a real idol of mine way back then.
So the demographics have changed significantly at a time when those demographics need to connect to all of this knowledge economy, to I-195, in a very realistic way. And we have to build new levels of understanding and new paradigms in our thinking about that population. It's about 65% minority demographic now, and it's going to grow. In the next 10 years, could be 70, 75%. And people have to stop thinking about it as some kind of a social, negative, but think of it as a human resource that has high potential if invested in properly and connected to I-95 and knowledge economy and all these things. Then great things can happen because there's a burst of energy, pent-up energy is waiting for something good to happen. The investment has to be made.
Mike, when do you start building? And what are you going to build?
I can't wait to hear this.
No, I mean, I think that the important thing is that we have been. And so, we've invested over $200 million in the jewelry district area. We have about 1,200 people, just a little bit shy of 1,200 people now with their home bases in the jewelry district. We've invested in public infrastructure, public streetscapes, a park. We took some of our land and created a little urban park. So our attitude is that's just going to continue over the years. I mean, we're at the very least a really invested neighbor to all this, if nothing else.
Do you have certain things that you're thinking about building down there, should the opportunity arise?
Yeah, we've many of you seen this, some of the news about the School of Engineering, but we've been doing a pretty careful analysis of the kinds of things that would be well served to be in the jewelry district versus on the College Hill campus. And we have, there's capacity in both places, and we're never going to make them one campus. They're very different places. But we can take advantage of both in similar ways. So things like the medical school, things like the laboratories for molecular medicine that are relatively freestanding and are reaching out to the private industry to try to make those connections. Things like continuing education. We have several administrative departments in that area, so those are the kinds of things that really fit quite well in the jewelry district.
Bert, you started AS220. I was there pretty early in your process, I have to admit, and I do the radio show from AS220. It started with $800. It started in a sort of a very, very small and in some ways illegal space, and now you have 3 buildings. You have many people working in and around AS220, and it served as an incubator throughout the City of Providence for various vocational efforts as well as living efforts on the part of many people. How do you see this knowledge or jewelry district fitting into the work that you've begun with downtown Providence?
First of all, I'm not on the commission. I have the luxury of throwing dots at the commission. AS220's formula is pretty basic, and I think it would apply here. I think the mixed-use, mixed-income development on a human scale. I think the plan's done. I think we should go back and look at what it looked like in 1880 and recreate it, frankly. So for me, no straight streets, no grid, scale that is on a human level, that encourages participation and lingering in the area, a natural bleed back into the west side and the south side of the city in the way that it once was before the highway decimated that, like it did in most cities. I think the previous speaker talked about the relative lack of success around planning around industrial kinds of parks or districts and those kinds of ideas. It's all to me about quality of place.
Marshall, Bert's referring to Mark Levine, and it was your initiative that brought him to Providence. What do you think he added to this kind of pot of opportunities and critique?
Well, I think Mark raised a number of issues. And, I was on the Economic Development Corporation's website this morning, and highlighted there is the Knowledge District as part of the state's economic development strategy. And there's no question that the state's economy is in dire condition. But when you look at the Knowledge District, it's amazing how little economic development knowledge has gone into planning the district. I have not seen one single serious study of what the economic impacts might be, of how to use the area most efficiently or most effectively, of who would be served, what kinds of jobs, what mix of jobs would happen, all the kinds of issues you would want to have done before you invest in what I was told today is $38 million of real estate and using it for some purpose that's allegedly economic development. None of that has been done. And I'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about why I think it hasn't been done. The point I think I want to raise, though, now is that, if this is just simply a land development project to build a nice mixed-use area that is going to provide comfortable urban living, I have no real problem with that, but it's really being advertised falsely because it's being advertised as a major step in revitalizing the state's economy, and it deflects attention from what we might actually do to revitalize the state's economy when we build it that way and we don't really consider what is going on.
Bonnie, Bert was talking about sense of place, and I know you're working on a couple of facets of this district to create a sense of place and participation. Can you describe those and what purpose you think they're going to be serving in terms of the area's vitality?
Sure. I think what Bert described is really important, which is that when this is built out, we don't want you to feel that you've entered into a new area. When you talk about that walk from downtown, from City Hall into the district, we don't want you to know that you've crossed into the 195 land. We want it to seem like a seamless neighborhood, part of downtown that is pedestrian friendly. There's activity on the street. There's retail shops, residences, and maybe there are other things happening on the upper floors that are Knowledge District D, but you wouldn't know that as you're walking through the district because it's going to feel like a vibrant urban street, and that's our goal. I think we're doing a couple of things that I think are really important and relate to that. One is the development of the public space that we've been working tirelessly with the Commission and RIDOT on developing 2 new waterfront parks that are going to be central to not just this district, but these are really the city's new front door. This is a new waterfront park. It sort of, in my mind, shifts the center of gravity of downtown south. And I think these are great opportunities to create that quality of place. And the other 2 things I want to mention are the pedestrian bridge, which is going to connect these 2 new waterfront parks, which I think the whole of those 3 things together is going to dramatically change the image of the city, and it's really going to be phenomenal. The other thing I want to just touch on, which I hope we'll have a chance to talk about more, is the development of a streetcar through the district, which is something that we're working really hard on right now, and I think has just an incredible catalytic possibility for not just the district, but for the city and state.
I want to, actually, I'm glad you opened that up because public transportation and access seems to be core principles of creating diversity in a particular place. How many of you up here believe in diversity and think that's important with the districts? No. Economic as well as national, cultural, and I put in quotes, racial. How many believe that that's important? Okay, how are we going to do it? I hate to do it.
I have a brown-skinned son. If any of you have a daughter that could start a nice diversity group. Seriously, raise your hand. You have to be rich, though.
He doesn't need your help. He doesn't need your help. He's a good guy. Don't get him in any trouble.
No, I love him. I sit with 6 very interesting commissioners, all different, all strong, full of integrity, and bring a lot, led by this gentleman here. I'm not here to sing the praises of I-195. I'm talking about, from my vantage point, serving on lots of commissions and boards. It's an outstanding group that hit the ground running.
Get to diversity. The diversity
is there.
I want to know about the diversity.
And we talk about real.
Huh? He doesn't need any more sunshine. He basks in it.
I've had enough. But I like to think of the I-195 project as more of a continuum. I mean, the kind of stuff that Bonnie presented, the historical Providence, the kind of stuff that Dan presented in terms of the work that's been done over the past. I had the opportunity to meet with a young Bill Warner, and we developed our first affordable housing project in the Mount Hope district of Providence. We developed 36 housing units when it wasn't fashionable to do that, and that was in 1967 or 68. So I developed a wonderful relationship with Bill. So my whole context goes from Bill Warner being exposed to crossing the rivers, to being exposed to, before it was even publicly announced, the I-195 project, and all the creative stuff that went on in Bill Warner's head. I also had the opportunity to see Andreas Dwani come to town. I was planning director and encouraged the Buff Chasers and the Johnson & Wales to vest in downtown.
Wait 1 second, excuse me. So would you be supportive of having an affordable housing project of some kind, or mixed affordability with market rates in that district? Is that one of the ways in which we're going to create diversity?
Here's what I am in favor of. I'm in favor of first looking at the principle of highest and best use of that land. I mean, there's some basic business things and tax things that have to be recognized in terms of where the City of Providence is and its ability to generate income to support public things. And the city needs help. And to the extent that a master plan could incorporate, and it was not inconsistent with the overall strategic plan, my concern is that pretty pictures get thrown around and suddenly people think it's the greatest idea in the world without the commission having an opportunity to vet all of the wonderful and creative ideas that people around in this room and beyond have before we come up with our plan.
So we're talking about economic vitality as being the first and the preeminent driving force in this district,
that's
right?
Been legislated. That's our charge. That's what we have to do.
Now, can affordability and diversity, Bert, be part of that mix? Yeah.
Well, we need 80,000 more people in the city of Providence to make things work. And if 80,000 of them were homeowners, that would be pretty remarkable, wouldn't it? Homeowners, by the way, pay taxes also. So, I mean, somebody else. The mixed income development and the scale and the human scale. I mean, we have cities that decimated the historic architecture and things like that. We were lucky enough that people weren't that interested in investing in us through a number of periods of urban renewal. And fortunately, we still have winding streets and buildings that scale well and really good representations of various kinds of architecture. You know, you take Hartford, Connecticut, or other places where they decimated the historic stock, put up giant high-rise buildings that are empty. I just spoke in Wilmington, Delaware, you know, the banking center of the universe, because they made such great policies around banking in Wilmington, and they're desperate to recreate some real feel to that city, you know, based on the kinds of decisions that they made many years ago, you know.
So we're talking about building on the historical aspects of the city, and which included a diverse population base that lived in that area. You know the city history much better than I do, but that area was pretty mixed, I would suspect, and certainly Fox Point was. How does Brown benefit from diversity?
We have the entire spectrum of economic and socioeconomic classes working at Brown.
But how would Brown benefit from diversity in the jewelry district?
We have that same workforce requirement that any company does, right? So we need people that are across the entire spectrum. So that's how we benefit.
In terms of relationship, what I'm trying to get at is this. So often we talk about diversity as something that's good to do, nice to do, rather than see it as essential and actually feeding the vitality of a community. You know, so often in cities around the United States, we live in segregated areas, work in segregated sections, and don't actually get a chance to learn from each other and benefit from that diversity. The opportunity to see a new district, essentially, I mean 27 acres or something, that has that potential for providing that for the city of Providence seems immense. It seems like a possibility to get the segregation that exists here as well as many cities sort of melted away and something new created. And what I'm trying to get at is how, if we all consider that important, not from the point of view of charity, but from the point of view of possibility, how do we get that done? How do we see this? Colin, how do we do that? Can we do that?
Two things. One on diversity. What people have to understand, is it mezzanines? Is it all office? Is it all resident? It's a linear mile. Okay, I encourage all of you to go walk it. There are parcels at the bottom of Wickenden Street that support 6 townhomes. And there are parcels that are next to 95 that you can put 1 million square feet of FAR. So the diversity relative to product type is built into the parcels themselves because it was a linear mile that split a city that is in itself in lots of different neighborhoods. Relative to diversity, it's pretty simple. If we want to encourage those less fortunate relative to income base to live in this district, the only way that works is through government subsidy, heavy government subsidy. The math of new construction and residential development requires pretty expensive space. If that's a government goal, federal, state, or other city, I certainly will consider that. But understand the math doesn't support just the market creating affordable housing.
Michael.
Yeah, there is absolutely no opposition. I mean, the commission is wide open, at least from our vantage point. We have putting together a community engagement committee. We have an artistic committee that looks at all these diverse issues. And it's not a matter of not including. I mean, we look at the legislation. The legislation pretty much defines this as a job creation kind of an activity. That's what the legislation tells us to do. We need to figure out how we take that and interpret in such a way that it becomes as much diversity in it as we possibly can get it. We know it has to have an impact on our urban neighborhoods. It's about 30% unemployment in those surrounding neighborhoods. We just have to be creative and figure out how we develop a scale of things that makes the overall project work within the objectives of the legislation.
Part of that, Mark, might be as simple, forgive me, is just building a better connection to the west end. I mean, right now the highway serves as that effective wall. So there's no connection. So that might be as simple as a bridge. I mean, not to oversimplify, but.
Bonnie, go ahead. Sorry.
Last year, we completed a planning study of the district with a team from New York called Perkins and Will, which led to kind of the zoning for the area. And when we first looked at the map of the area, the Perkins and Will team said, okay, you guys moved the wrong highway. And that wasn't helpful, but I think it's a very good point, because when we talk about access, physical access is so important, and I think, Colin, what you said is right on, that we've figured out how to connect to the east side